Welcome to the Fit Check, your weekly news for the best and heaviest new albums from your favorite extreme metal and hardcore bands. This week kind of feels like being a kid at a soda machine. I want hardcore, death metal, deathcore, metalcore, slam, and mix it all together. So yeah, we've got kind of a witch's brew of everything going on this week. So as always, make sure to subscribe to the channel because we do this every week. And let's get into this week's best new albums. 100% Latino straight edge hardcore. The Colombian hardcore band Raw Brigade is back with this incredible dual language album titled 100%. Raw Brigade has always blended both English and Spanish in their vocals, but here it turned into two completely separate versions of the album. And from here on out, I'm going to play the clips from the Spanish version because, honestly, I think it hits harder in Spanish. They have this raw as hell blend of this 80s New York hardcore and that DIY straight edge hardcore. So you should expect tons of two-steps, ripping bass, infectious punk melodies and riffs, and a solid amount of solos and shredding. But more than anything, there's just so much passion and energy, with Raw Brigade specifically wanting to showcase 100% of who they are both as a band and as people. I am obsessed with this album, and I see a huge future for this band. They somehow managed to include everything from pride for their hometown of Bogota, their experience being immigrants, Latino pride, and of course, tons of straight-edge hype music. All within 20-ish minutes, and none of it feels disjointed. In fact, it's the opposite. Everything works so cohesively. Do not sleep on this one. 1914, a very boring year where nothing happened. The Ukrainian Blackened Death Metal band 1914 have released their latest album titled Viribus Unitis. I don't know how it's possible, but this band keeps releasing masterpiece after masterpiece. This album is absolutely devastating, both sonically and lyrically. It genuinely feels like the embodiment of the gruesome brutality of war. And of course, that is by design, with this album telling the story of a Ukrainian soldier fighting in the Austro-Hungarian War, with each song perfectly mirroring the peaks and valleys of like adrenaline and heartbreak and triumph and misery, and their unrelenting yet precise blending of this black metal, death metal, doom metal, and even a little bit of sludge could not be more perfectly suited for this subject matter. For a band that already feels like they were performing at the highest caliber possible, they have somehow outdone themselves once again. This album is a technical masterpiece with literally zero repetition or stagnation. This is a must-hear album, period. The German metalcore scene is insane right now. The German metalcore band Avralize has released their sophomore album titled Liminal. If you love metalcore that is groovy and funky as hell, not afraid to be tongue-in-cheek and super dancey, and most importantly, just genuinely fun to listen to, definitely give this album a shot. 2025 has been a goldmine for lovers of this high-energy, dancey metalcore. This will slot in perfectly on that playlist with Dance Gavin Dance, or Via Nova, or Thornhill, or even Bill Murray. There's just so much of those catchy as hell earworm choruses and melodies, but always making sure to be as crazy and experimental as possible. They want to show off how good they are at their instruments and not just leaning on production. And hey, not to sound like a broken record, but hell yes, more bass guitar. That thick, juicy bass is so good and works so well whether they're grooving or they're hitting a genuinely nasty breakdown. And there's so much variety here, not just song to song, but also within the songs themselves, which often leads to a stronger second half than the first half. It's like by the second half of the song, they let themselves go off the rails and get a little bit more experimental. So I can't decide if I like this one or their debut album Freaks just a little bit more. I might be leaning towards Freaks because it's just a little bit heavier, but honestly, they're both equally as good. They just scratch a slightly different itch. Did you know the guys from Amon Amarth have an even heavier death metal band? The Swedish melodic death metal band Fimbul have released their debut EP titled What Once Was. If you're a fan of that true 90s melodic death metal sound that could only come from Scandinavia, this is about to be your new favorite band. This EP feels like trying to survive a Swedish winter with nothing but a bare pelt. This release is a non-stop assault of shredding and riffs, and that little bit of atmosphere and orchestration adds this like layer of ominous fog, but without overproducing any of the instrumentals or vocals. Everything still sounds gritty and tangible. This is only 5 songs long, but clocks in at a hefty 23 minutes. This is honestly a release that could only have been made by people who have been honing their craft for decades upon decades. If you're a fan of Melodeath, this is a zero-skip, near-perfect EP. No, not that Earth Eater. The brutally heavy death metal and deathcore crossover band Earth Eater have released their latest album titled Bleeding Hypocrisy. They call themselves Pacific Northwest Extreme Metal, and that sort of vague genre kind of makes a lot of sense, given they blend everything from tech death to deathcore to brutal death metal to symphonic and even a little bit of beatdown. I don't think we've ever had such a good year for disgustingly heavy music, especially ones that put in such high effort. This isn't just stupidly heavy for the sake of being stupidly heavy. This band is beyond impressive on every front. The guitars, the drums, this literal demon of a vocalist are all putting on a clinic. This is 11 songs of sheer punishing brutality, all while being kind of a breath of fresh air, which is kind of ironic given that this album sounds like you're chained at the bottom of a cellar. Anti-Imperialism Slam goes crazy. The anti-war slamming hardcore band Torture has put out their latest album titled War Crime 2: Genocide Protocol. I did not see this one coming. For a band that used to be primarily frog noises, this album has a lot to say. Warcrime 2 is the most technical and relentless this band has ever been. This is some absolute slamming brutality, clearly pulling inspiration from bands like Disgorge, Defeated Sanity, and Devourment, but with bass drops so low they might hit the brown note. But I really shouldn't be joking. This is the most stone cold serious and poignant release from Torture thus far. And it makes a lot of sense, especially since they go out of their way to present an educated stance instead of a performative one. And this album is technically in 3 parts, with part 1 being the actual written material that we're listening to here, part 2 are these short, improvised, chaotic screams of rage, and 3 is a symphonic piece designed to be played by 12 musicians. So the real meat on the bone you're looking for is here on part 1, although 2 and 3 are still worth checking out. But for real, this part 1 is so good and should definitely be checked out, especially if you love some surprisingly big brain slam. UK hardcore never disappoints. The London-based hardcore band False Reality has released their debut album titled Faded Intentions. If you like more than 3 chords in your hardcore, this is gonna be up your alley. They already had a super impressive debut EP last year, but here they blew themselves out of the water with this one. For only having 4 members, it's so impressive to see them constantly juggling all of these different styles. Everything from old school hardcore to thrash to a little bit of beatdown, and no shortage of these old school punk melodies, and even face-melting solos. And this vocalist has such angst and rage behind these screams, and then will still hit these like shoegazy kind of grungy cleans every so often. This is such a sick new album that is kind of deceptively simple. That doesn't initially sound like they're really breaking the mold here, but the more you pay attention and kind of peel back the curtains, the more you realize how much is actually going on here. Definitely check this out if you like your hardcore music to have layers, like an onion or an ogre. Alright, calling this a magnum opus might be, by God. The UK deathcore band Osiah have released their latest EP titled Aion. This sort of transcends the deathcore genre and kind of just becomes generally evil music. Everything here is so dark and ominous and outright filthy. Something about this EP feels megalophobic, like it's this giant entity that could just crush a continent with a single step. Real quick, I also want to give a shout out to the band Dark Entity. This is some awesome 2000s metalcore that you should definitely be aware of. And also the band So Far So Good. This is some cool experimental hardcore. Sometimes, I swear to God, it sounds like Rollo Tomasi and the Acacia Strain had a baby. And of course, here is the list of all of the new albums that came out this week. If I missed anything on this list, or there was something on this list that I should have spent more time on here, definitely let me know in the comments. And huge shout out to the band Overthrow for sending me this jacket. They're a sick Long Island hardcore band. We've talked about them on the show before, and they were super kind and sent me the sweater and a t-shirt. So if you have any leftover tour merch or anything you want me to wear on the show, literally shoot me a DM. I would be happy to wear it. It's the winter. I'm trying to build up my closet. So thank you again for joining me on these weekly roundups of all of the new albums that come out, and I'll catch you next week for next week's best new albums.